Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Emma, also known as Made in the Moment, and today I'm sitting on my floor next to my plant because it's very hot and I don't want to set up a chair or anything else. A few months ago, I started unraveling sweaters to use for yarn. I've knit a couple things with them. I've done a few so far, and I've only made TikToks about it, but I really wanted to sit down and make a whole YouTube video of my process just because, you know, there's only so much you can say in a 3-minute video, and I've gotten a lot of questions about them, so I would love to be able to answer some of them and just go through step by step my process for unraveling a sweater and upcycling the yarn. It does take a lot of time, but it's pretty straightforward once you try it. If you like this video and want to follow me anywhere else, I have an Instagram and a TikTok. I post much more regularly on both of those, so go ahead and follow those if you're interested. I'm also going to be hand dyeing this yarn at some point, and I'm hoping to try out some natural dyes. So if you're interested in seeing a video on that, then leave a comment below. But that's pretty much all I have to say. Without further ado, let's get into the video. So what you will need is a sweater that you don't want anymore, and then some scissors or a seam ripper. Honestly, a seam ripper would be great, and people always ask me why I don't have one, and I don't really have an answer. I just haven't gotten one. But if you don't have a seam ripper, these little kind of scissors with the tiny pointy ends are a really good thing to use anyway. When trying to pick a sweater to unravel, you want to look for a few things. The first thing that I look for is the fiber content. If I'm going to be spending a bunch of time unraveling something, then I want to be sure it's worth my time. So I try to go for 100% natural materials. So this is 100% cotton. In the past, I've unraveled Shetland wool and cashmere. This I specifically bought with the plan to try out some natural dyes on it. So I wanted to make sure it was a natural material so that it would hopefully pick up the dyes a little bit better. Another thing you want to look for is something that is joined with, see if I can get it to focus, with these little crochet like slip stitches, because once you find the end of that to unravel it, all you have to do is just pull and then the whole thing unseams. You don't want something that is seamed over with like a sewing machine over the edges, because then that usually means that the piece is knit in like big sections and then cut up and just seamed together over the edges. This means that first of all, it'll be pretty easy to unravel and disconnect the panels. Second of all, you'll have actual long pieces of yarn to work with. So the first thing I always do is take off the tag at the back. So this is nice because it's stitched on with black thread. So I'm just going to cut one end here. And this is where a seam ripper would come in handy, but these little scissors are doing just fine. So I'm basically just making a little cut here and pulling out these threads. And I'm just going to save this for my own records. You don't have to, but I like to keep hold of them. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Again, seam ripper would be great, but we're making do with what we have here. So I'm just going to kind of go into one of these loops right here and sort of tease it open. This is a little harder because they used white thread. I don't want to cut the actual sweater, but there we go. I've loosened it up a little bit. And I'm just going to keep cutting until I get it all the way off. And there we go. Let's save these little bits of thread and put them in my scrap yarn bin later on. And then next I like to start with a neckline. I tend to usually unravel sweaters that are like actual sweaters, not cardigans. And this is an extremely interesting neckline. But as you're examining the neckline, you kind of just want to start looking at the seam. So this is where the neckline connects to the body of the sweater. So you want to find this crochet stitch that is connecting the collar to the body. And you want to go up to where the top of it is with the V of the stitch facing down. So that's up in this corner. I'm just going to go into one of these stitches and cut it open, taking care not to cut into the actual fabric of either of the sides. I'm just gonna kind of tease that out. There we go. But you're kind of just gonna pull on this chain connecting things. Pull on it all the way to the edge of the seam. See how cleanly this ends up. Oh, perfect. And this has left me with a fairly short but still usable amount of yarn for the seam. So I'm gonna save this later for seaming up other things that I knit with or for tying up my hanks later on. And then you can see there's still a couple stitches or something holding this in place. So I'm just gonna kind of tease this open a little bit before I cut into it, just to kind of figure out what is going on. There's what seems to be the edge of another crochet chain here. And a second one. So it looks like there is another chain underneath it. So I'm just gonna cut into this one as well. Making sure to cut just into the chain stitch and not into the body of the sweater again. There we go. Getting it a little more unraveled. Especially at the beginning, it kind of just takes a little bit of guesswork and really careful cutting. And I think it's safe to cut this one because this is pretty attached here. Oh, there we go. This is connected to the chain. So I'm going to cut this chain here. Oh, there we go. Perfect. That was one of the easiest collar removals I've ever done, so don't be frustrated if it's a little bit trickier for you. This looks like it's some kind of folded hemline going into this kind of brioche looking stitch. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But first, before I unravel this panel, I'm just going to keep disconnecting all of the rest of the pieces. So this one's nice because it has a really nice big chunk, which I could actually turn this into something. So maybe I won't unravel it. I'm gonna hold on to this for a second and think about it. So next I'm gonna go to the shoulder seam, and here we can see the little crochet tails just sticking right out. So I'm gonna just cut both of those. And again, a lot of my technique at the beginning is kind of just pull on things and see what comes out. When you're deciding what to cut, if you see any of these little kind of chain things sticking out of the edge, those are usually pretty safe to cut. There we go. Got another chain. Just gonna pull that through till I hit some resistance. There seems to be something else holding it together as well. And pretty much just for the rest of the seams, you're going to do the same thing. Like I said, there's a lot of just trial and error and figuring out what you can cut and figuring out what you shouldn't cut. The main thing is you don't want to cut into any of the panels because that's going to affect the length of yarn that you actually want to salvage. All of the crocheted seams are just with shorter pieces of yarn that you wouldn't be able to use anyway. So as long as you can kind of tease the end out, then you can just cut little pieces like that. I'm gonna add a few more clips in here of me unraveling things because first of all, I find it very satisfying to watch. And second of all, there might be some little thing that I do at some point that is helpful to you. But basically, at this point, it's just going through each seam. I usually start at the top of the sweater and work my way down. So I do the collar. Then depending on how the seams are done on the armholes, I either undo the armhole first and then do from the cuff of the sleeve up to the armpit, or the other way around, just depending on kind of what's sewn down and what's where. Once you've made it through all of the seams and you have each of the panels separated, then you're going to start unwinding them. And I like to use a yarn winder. I just find this goes a lot faster. You can also wind it by hand pretty easily, or you can use a yarn swift. I like to use a yarn winder because I find that it's the fastest. But you basically just start at the top of the panel. When you're looking at the panel, you'll see the knit stitches look like little V's, and you want the bottom of the V facing down. And then you're going to start at the top of that panel, cut on one of the sides. You can usually see which end is going to unravel the easiest. And then you're just going to attach it to your yarn winder or start unraveling it by hand, and you're good to go. I usually do find that the hardest part is getting the panels apart, and then once you've done that, the rest of it is pretty easy. Now I'm going to insert some clips of just me unwinding, just some fun stuff. What I could have done was just put it onto my Swift straight from the sweater, but I find that winding it onto my yarn winder goes so much quicker, and it's just worth the effort of taking it from a cake and turning it back into a hank. I know it seems like a lot of steps, but it's just so much easier for the yarn to be washed when it's in a hank, and it's so much easier to unwind with the yarn winder. And of course I want to actually wash the yarn before I use it, and it helps kind of get out some of that like texture that the yarn has after it's been knit up. So after unraveling everything, I ended up with 693 grams of yarn, which is kind of a lot actually. So there's a lot that I can do with this, and I'm really excited because I'm gonna dye it. If you remember what the sweater looked like before I unraveled it, it had this weird color thing. So I actually decided not to unravel this because it's such a nice big square piece of fabric. So I'm going to turn it into a little tank top, but I weighed that as well just to see like how much yarn total the sweater had, and it was 847 grams. I might dye the little collar thing too. So now that I have everything in cakes, I'm going to turn it all into hanks. A hank is basically just a big circle of yarn, and this is a much better way to wash it and dye it. So the way I wind a cake back into a hank is I kind of just loop the end of the yarn through the middle part of the Swift. Mine has these little notches on it. I'm not sure if this is exactly how you're supposed to do it, but it works for me. And then I just kind of push the middle part around and just keep spinning until it turns into a hank. But I pretty much just do that for all of the yarn until it's done. Once I'm done winding, I tie figure 8 knots. You basically just split the yarn into 2 sections and then make sort of a figure 8 around those 2 sections. You can probably look up videos that are a little bit closer and you can see a little bit better, but this is the way that you have to tie the hank, otherwise it will unravel. And you want to put 2 to 4 of those in there. I think the more the better, and the less the yarn will move around as you're washing it. And then this is just what it looks like when I twist it up. I usually do this after I wash it, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like. You kind of just twist in opposite directions and then stick one end through the other end, and it makes this nice little loop. To wash the yarn, I basically just put it all into my bathtub, and I use this dish soap. You can also use like a wool soap if you have one. I just don't have one. So I'm just putting the hanks in and then kind of squishing them around so that I make sure everything gets all wet and is sort of evenly wet throughout. I'm washing this weird little collar part too because I'm going to use that and probably dye it eventually. But then I just let that soak for about 20 to 30 minutes and hang it up to dry very unceremoniously like this. My partner actually dropped all of this on the ground. That's why it looks a little bit rough, but you know, what are you gonna do? And this is how it all looks after being washed. I am so happy with it. The wash actually straightened it out really, really nicely. This is like a really nice quality worsted weight cotton. So I'm super excited to dye it and knit with it. I think I'm going to try using some natural dyes like avocado skins and red onion skins. But that is pretty much it. It can be sort of a lengthy process, so I don't do this very often, but I think it's a really fun thing to try. And if you've never done it before, then dig around in your closet or go to a thrift store and see what you can find. Thank you so much for watching if you made it all the way to the end. I will see you next time.